Good evening, Council. We're here tonight to provide an update on Shape Your City, the coordinated planning effort that we began last year and will be working on for the next through 2024 to reimagine the long-term future of our city. Next slide, please. Tonight, we're going to be giving an overview of the first phase of Shape Your City, the first phase of community engagement, what we've heard to date, and next steps. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, the Shape Your City initiative was developed as a way to coordinate some major updates to the Comprehensive Plan, Transportation Master Plan, and Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. You'll hear me say TMP and PROS plan throughout this presentation. We wanted to streamline the community engagement portion as well as the planning effort as well. And that required coordination both internally and externally. Next slide, please. So we asked some questions of the community. We started this conversation with our community last summer, and we wrapped it up in early winter. So we asked some questions, very broad, to help us create a shared vision. So the questions were, what do you wish for your city, street, or neighborhood? How can we improve infrastructure like roads and public buildings? How will we play and stay healthy? What type of businesses and jobs do you want to see in Burien? What types of housing do we need? And what will the character of Burien be? Next slide, please. Our goals for this first phase, next slide. Our goals for this first phase of community engagement really focused on raising awareness of just the planning process in general and inspiring our community and key stakeholders to get involved. It was also sort of establishing some methods as well, which we'll talk about more in a minute. We wanted to create some feeling among our community and also other key stakeholders that their voices were being heard throughout this process, with the ultimate result that the final plans are responsive to community priorities and needs. Next slide, please. So we used several different methods during this first phase, and this includes some city-sponsored workshops, both online and in person. That includes some mini workshops at the community center where we set them up at the same time as some popular recreation classes so that we could intercept folks coming in and out of those classes. We tabled at community events like the Farmers Market, B-Town Fiesta, Boulevard Park Block Party, several Music in the Park events, and also Welcoming Burien. Next slide, please. And we had an online workshop as well. We also tabled at back-to-school events. I think we were at 4 to 5 back-to-school events. We attended some after-school programs, talking to some teens. And then our community connectors who were being onboarded at this time. We were still in the recruitment phase of the Community Connectors program when all of this community engagement was happening. You have 2 of our connectors pictured here who are at the Dia de los Muertos event, and they helped not only gather feedback at that event, but encouraged folks to take the Spanish language survey as well. Next slide, please. We also launched a really robust digital side of this engagement. We launched the new Burien Community Hub, which is a one-stop shop website that's multilingual, and we use it not just for Shape Your City, but for all planning efforts. The Shape Your City project site itself included some background information, calendar of events, blog posts that provide updates on the project, and then a public comment map, which was powered by Social Pinpoint software. And that gathered location-based feedback, and that was really popular. We gathered hundreds of comments through just that map-based feedback alone. We also provided ways for people to sign up for email updates on the project. Some people may have received an email actually that this presentation was happening because we sent something out on Friday. We also share updates on our social media channels. And then also we devoted the fall issue of the Burien magazine. We did a big feature on Shape Your City, and we, issued some press releases that got sent to some local media like the B-Town blog. And then we also developed flyers and yard signs that you would have seen in our local parks and public buildings that directed people back to the website. Next slide, please. So for this next portion, Susan, Carolyn, and Maya are going to be talking about what we heard.
Hi there. So what we actually had a lot of different comments ranging on a lot of different topics. We had over 1,700 comments, and that includes 17 events, and that includes also 750 online comments. And I have to credit some of our staff in parks and other departments for cataloging each and every one of those comments, and then being able to kind of analyze where are some of the, cross-cutting issues and interests that people have. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit hard to see, but it kind of outlines where some of the top comments came from. And not unexpectedly, a lot of comments were about parks and recreation, owing due in part to people's interests in parks and recreation, but also to the engagement that park staff did to reach out to people. A lot of comments on transportation, which is pretty common when doing a citywide survey, land use and economic development, and housing. And then, as you can see too, there were many different comments about trees and green Burien, public safety. A lot of people concerned about the environment, maintenance of public facilities, including streets and that kind of thing. A lot of comments on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some commentary on community character, which is a bit of a theme in the comprehensive plan, social services, and a few other topics as well. We did do some engagement with in some schools, and so there's we got some really great feedback from families, both reflected in the comments and just conversation we were able to have, just dialogue we were able to have with those families. Next slide, please. So we also broke down the commentary into more detailed categories. And the top, I'll just say really quickly, the top categories that we heard about were housing, economic development, community character, park amenities, and public safety. I was presenting to the Human Services Commission a while ago, and there were some questions about public safety and what that means. And it does, people did speak to crime and issues of, more traditional public safety, but there was also concerns about how we treat people who are experiencing homelessness, what public safety means in terms of just crossing the street and how one feels about being a pedestrian and just living in a neighborhood. So public safety is a pretty broad category actually as well. Next slide, please. So I was asked to just outline some of the topics that emerged around issues of land use and economic development. And there was a lot of support for small, locally owned businesses, which we expected. There was a lot of interest in people being able to walk or have amenities and services in their neighborhoods, which I thought was pretty interesting. Interest in zoning that accommodates more mixed use. As you probably know, in Burien, we have several arterials where their services are concentrated, and then a lot of sort of single family and residentially focused neighborhoods without services. So there was interest in seeing more of a mix of uses. And then interest in seeing different kinds of public gathering spaces, places where youth can gather, just community spaces, including parks, but also less formal spaces as well. Next slide, please. So one of the concepts that I think emerged that fits with what we were guessing about with respect to land use and what the future of Burien might incorporate over the next 20 years is the idea of a 15-minute city. And this is a graphic that you can find all over the web, but it illustrates what a 15-minute city is. And we saw this idea reflecting in a lot of the comments that we heard. The idea is that people can live and also walk to the services they need in their neighborhood. So places of work, places of worship, grocery, places to get dry cleaning, pick up your child, take your child to school, that kind of thing. So the idea is to explore the concept of 15-minute nodes throughout Burien and what that might look like. And so we'll see in our next round of comments and our next round of outreach if we were able to get a little bit closer to that idea. Next slide, please. So ideas for that 15-minute city, I'm just going to go on a little bit further on it than I guess. People did have specific ideas as to where those little neighborhood nodes might be. Of course, we've been talking a lot about the Ambom corridor, so people had specific ideas for along Ambom. The Five Corners area, there's a few intersections along First Avenue that people had an interest in. Boulevard Park, downtown, and Old Burien, sort of the core areas that we kind of think of typically as sort of mixed use neighborhoods where people can walk and get around. Next slide, please. We also heard other comprehensive plan themes, which we're currently exploring as part of our comprehensive plan work. A need for affordable housing at all income bands, and that includes market rate housing. It includes, and then it also includes different income bands for affordability as well. We saw interest in a range of housing types, and it was kind of interesting to see how some of that broke out. We can provide more data on that in the future. A lot of interest in sort of the missing middle types of housing, and that is sort of housing between sort of the what we see downtown, which is a little bit taller and bigger, and single family. So things in between, which might be townhouses, cottage housing. It includes duplexes up to fourplexes, but and also there was interest in multi-generational housing, senior housing. And then there was discussion about where different housing types would be appropriate. Next slide, please. And I believe this is Carolyn's. Or is this mine? It is mine. All right, great. So we were talking about public safety and social and human services. A really interesting talk with the Human Services Commission as well, because they had a lot of insight on some of these issues. But from the data, what we saw was an interest in larger police presence in certain areas like parks, residential streets, business district to enhance the perception of public safety. And then public safety also included interest in services that are accessible by a 15-minute walk. We heard a lot of a need for services for women and moms, especially immigrant refugee communities, interest in services for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And then public safety, it was interesting to see people kind of draw a link between housing and affordability and public safety, basically providing for the needs of people who live, work, play, and worship in Burien. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Susan. So in the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services commentary, we had a lot of interest in just generally more parks, green space, and trees, and access to water throughout the city. And when I say throughout the city, definitely there was an interest in having a better distribution of those facilities throughout the city. There was also a growing interest in having more small parks just nested within different neighborhoods so that there's an easy place to walk to. Definitely there were comments about playgrounds, but also, as Susan mentioned, these informal places where people can gather, share a meal, or take some takeout and congregate with friends. There were some very interesting comments with specific recommendations on how to connect trails through the city to connect parks together and get people from one point to another of interest. So we'll be exploring those more. Next slide, please. A few comments on recreation and new facilities. For recreation programming, there's an interest in more free programming for after school, including some sports leagues. After having some more affordable programming, just always can't have enough of that, and having some programs embedded in the neighborhoods. For facilities, there's an interest in splash pads, a pool, an active community center with more fitness amenities, and a theater or performing arts center. Next slide, please. And this slide talks about amenities that people would like to have more of or new facilities within parks. So this is a wide variety of things that we'll continue to test in the next round of engagement, from restrooms in parks to gardens with pollinators, more playgrounds and ball fields, dog parks, a wide variety of things. On the next slide, We started to see some themes emerge around certain parks throughout the city that we will continue to test in phase 2 with the community. For the annex, there were a lot of ideas, from new trees, a walking path, tennis courts, play equipment, updates to the skate park, adding restrooms. In Boulevard Park, we didn't have that many comments, but there were a couple related to acquiring the local bank as an indoor recreation place, maybe acquiring the golf course as a large outdoor space. And then there were ideas in Chelsea to more activate that park more and provide more amenities to the community, including a spray park, walking paths, and more trees. And there's ongoing interest in activating and providing better access to Salmon Creek Ravine through more parking, trailhead amenities, improving the trails, and so forth. In this last, next slide, please. In this last round of outreach, we did receive some comments on public art, but also last year we spent a lot of time with the Arts Commission, and our arts staff did some engagement work about a long-range public art plan. And I wanted to summarize some of that with you here tonight, because we'll be going out and engaging the community on this in phase 2 of Shape Your City. So some of the things that emerged were places where people would like to see public art in the future, and they're listed here in bullet form, but parks and streetscapes, civic buildings, and expanding our public art connection into the neighborhoods. Right now, most of it is in the downtown core. We also saw some themes about where, the themes of which we would want to see in public art. So there was a strong connection to celebrating our diversity and the cultures of people who live in Burien, and telling the history of our city. We also want to go out and confirm what types of public art people want to see, whether they're large permanent works or small temporary things that you encounter through a walk through the city, expanding our mural collection, or exploring different kinds of art like interactive art and so forth. And on the next slide, we'll also be continuing to investigate whether the types of artists that people want us to hire through the public art program. There's been a strong interest in hiring local artists and emerging artists, and just testing to make sure that's still the case. And then also there's a large opportunity to enhance the public art collection through our existing properties, which are primarily parks. So finding out where people would like to prioritize parks in the public art process. And that's all I have. I will pass it on to Maya.
Similar to the other plans, the Transportation Master Plan will provide framework for investments over the next 20 years. So it's essential that it reflects the comments we received, and we've drafted some visions that are seen on the screen here that emphasize the general desire to be able to travel safely using many different modes of travel, and to have a well-connected and maintained system. I'm gonna go ahead and read that vision. It says, people get around Burien safely and comfortably by walking, biking, rolling, riding transit, or driving. Transportation assets, including streets, sidewalks, bike facilities, and trails, are well maintained, connected, and vibrant community spaces that enrich public life, health, and the environment. Transportation decisions are made equitably to prioritize investments for those who have the least access. And on the next slide, I'll review some of the themes we heard in this outreach. We did receive hundreds of comments related to transportation, and those were really spread across the city, but the major themes included safety, especially walking. And people want well-maintained sidewalks, and they want good lighting. They want sidewalks and safe crossings to schools and to transit stops and to grocery stores. They also want us to provide modal options in residential neighborhoods so that they can either bus or walk or cycle in their residential neighborhoods. They've asked that we provide access from neighborhoods to regional trails through sidewalks and better wayfinding signage. And then on the right side of the screen are some of the things specific to walking and biking. But I also want to point out that throughout the city, there was a lot of talk about access to transit and having better transit options in the city. So those are things I think we really need to look to focusing on and improving our bus and other transit services. While comments were received everywhere, we had a particular interest in downtown, not too surprisingly, but also the Southwest 160th corridor, Ambom corridor, and quite a few people in kind of the general Hazel Valley Elementary area, 130th, 132nd, kind of between Ambom and to the east. There was a unusual amount of comments from that area, so we'll be looking at improvements there. So using this information, we're going to begin to develop types of projects and ideas for where those could be located throughout the city. We'll develop a map as we move forward for the next round of community engagement on transportation to help us kind of confirm those themes and see if we're capturing the kinds of projects that people want. I'm going to pass it back to Emily, and she's going to talk about next steps.
Thank you, Maya. Next slide, please. So we are entering phase 2 of this project, and our goals around planning for this phase are to develop strategies that are responsive to what we've already heard and then test them with the community. This is an iterative process. We're going to be a little bit more focused. So last time we were really broad, trying to be in a lot of different places. Instead, we're going to be a little bit more targeted. We're going to be working with our community connectors very closely. We're going to be looking at scheduling some focused discussion groups around particular topics like housing or climate resilience, transportation, things like that. There will be some surveys, but they'll be a little bit more targeted than some of the general surveys that happened in the last phase. There will be at least one citywide, like anybody can come workshop or open house. We're still nailing down the details of that this spring. And then there'll be some new online tools as well. We're also talking about doing some mailers because as we know, not everybody, reads the B-Town blog or, follows us on social media. So getting stuff in the mail is still a really important way of reaching folks. We're going to be redistributing our yard signs out to the community. And then the next issue of the magazine will have some information about this next phase of the project. Next slide, please. I'll just say before we pause for questions, we are always grateful for the City Council's and community support in helping amplify this community engagement by sharing our communications with your networks to encourage participation. And then with that, we have we'll pause for any questions.
Councilmember Mata.
So when we were looking at the chart, it said transportation and transit, which seems to be kind of the same, right? And if you were to add those numbers, it would really be up there in some of the top categories. And, I got to speak for the seniors in Burien, and I know that there's been an advocate who every time she finds me, she talks about that we have a lot of senior housing facilities in Burien and that it's very hard for them, although we're a healthcare community because it's our biggest employer in the city of Burien. It's very hard for them to be able to get to their appointments and on Thursdays, I get to, enjoy the farmer's market, but yet they cannot enjoy the farmer's market. And, we have some great areas in Burien, such as the Italian Cultural Center, the Muslim Youth Center, the Latino Civic Center, the Heritage Museum. And so I almost think that sometimes, we get so caught up in that we forget about our seniors in our community. And so I know that Tina Orwell, who's our House representative, said she's very interested in figuring out how she can help the city of Burien with local transportation, right, for our seniors and for those individuals that may be housebound or that are on fixed income. So I'd like to state that for the record. I know that their office has reached out to myself, and I'd like to see if the city of Burien can reach out to them. So that's one very important one that I think that's, that we should spend some time on. Also, now that I'm remembering that I'm part of a committee of how do we help our economy, local economies in the South End, maybe it's something that we partner up with different cities that have something to offer. I know that Burien has a lot to offer when it comes to culture, art, food. We're called Foodie Paradise, but maybe something that maybe we can entice the county and our state to be able to, especially now that we've we've set our application for a historical site to be able to figure out how we can not only have transportation within our own facilities in our own city. On top of that, as I think that for a regional transportation effort to be able to have a highway meet I-5 from Burien, from the port all the way into I-5, I think we should have a good negotiating chip that for the regional transportation system that we want to make sure that we're supportive. But we also, I think, should have the ability to have transportation within our city. We weren't part of the Sun Transit, so we don't really have a train going anywhere, but yet we as a working class community, we provide workers to Redmond, to Seattle, to some of the bigger cities, but yet the only form of transportation that we have is the transit system that, I think we should be pushing a little bit on figuring out how we can make sure that our elderly and those people on fixed incomes can at least travel to be able to go to Fred Meyer or Safeway, and that may stimulate our economy. On top of that, we have a hospital, an emergency room. I'm very grateful that my daughter was born in Burien at it wasn't Francis's back in the day, it's the Highline Hospital, but it'd be great to be able to figure out as we're treating people with the hospital facilities to be able to have them come out to our restaurants and eat and be able to get away from stress that they're going through. I think Burien has a lot to offer to our community, but I would like to see if we can maybe clean that up a little bit, whether it's, and I think both, I may be wrong, but I think the meaning of transit and transportation may be together. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mata. Anyone else? Councilmember Sarah?
Thank you for presenting this. And I really enjoyed seeing well, it's 4 of you because Emily's coming in virtually. I enjoyed seeing all of the pieces rolled into one. It helped me make connections between, oh, look, the trail runs right through Public Works and into the park, so that in giving feedback, people aren't giving feedback to departments, they're giving it to the city. And I think this was a really good tool to capture that. Councilmember Mata brought up something that I've had a community member talk to me quite a bit about, which is transportation for seniors who maybe are looking for the things that might be a 15-minute walk to somebody who was younger, who was more able-bodied. And they've brought up the possibility of, could there be a Burien, I guess, like a bus route that just went to the places in Burien that everybody needs to go to, or some kind of system that's smaller than asking Metro to do it, which seems like, yeah, well, we'll have that in 2044 if we start now, but something that could be done more locally. And I also wanted to ask during information gathering if there ever were any information collected from youth, from people. Okay, thank you. I saw nods.
Yes, we had several events at the schools. Some were during the beginning of the school year with the parent and student open houses. And I think we went to about 5 schools at that time. And then also went out to 2 middle schools after school programs in the fall and specifically spoke with students there. And youth were involved in a lot of the tabling events too.
Other comments? Well, and I would like to just add that in hearing from other cities, that micro transportation is another idea. So short of a bus, if you don't have volume, then there could be a local or internal, something like a Uber, and that may help with parking issues as well. So I just wanted to put that as one thing to consider. Okay. Councilmember Mora.
Thank you. One thing that actually popped into my mind with a small bus that Kent actually does this. They have what's called a shopper shuttle. It's a small bus that's if it's, I don't know, maybe 20 people. And I love that Kent has that. Maybe that's what some of the council members are thinking of bringing to Burien. One thing that I wanted to hopefully, as we start discussing more about things that are going to be built, parks, maybe would love to see more. Well, not that we have it yet, but instead of like grass for lawn, maybe like clover. If we can start thinking more about micro clover for lawns instead of grass itself. One thing that I actually love about my neighborhood is we have a lot of houses that have a little library, a free little library. And I was kind of thinking that might be something that we might want to start thinking about for the parks that we have. It seems something so small, but maybe someone that's not as close to the library, they would be like families would want to walk to another area that has this free little library. And also like seed exchange is another one that is very popular right now. So I'm thinking maybe if we can bring some of that to our little walking areas, it might make those like neighborhoods more family friendly, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilmember Moore.
I just wanted to say thank you for all the incredible work that went into this. That is amazing to hear that we're doing outreach at schools. Like that's just, you all go above and beyond always. And it's incredible to see, and the results show. So just appreciation for all your hard work. And it's really great to hear all this wonderful feedback from our community and looking towards the future and seeing what comes of it.
Councilmember Mata.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the other thing that I like, because we talked a little bit about street art, and I know we have some hot areas for graffiti, and I know that there's one on 136th Street in Amham, and there's a particular shopping facility there, and we invested some money on a little, I think it's like maybe 2 4x8 plywood surfaces that we put on a wall, and we had community and young people be able to articulate their ability to draw on a wall, and it helped us tremendously on that wall. And I've seen graffiti just continuing to be an issue, and the thing is that it's the same walls. I mean, it's the same walls. So I think that if we can figure out where the hot spots for graffiti are, that we can be able to figure out how, okay, where do we need to be able to, you know, something. We're a very strapped city for money, but I know that there's philanthropists that want to help with art. In fact, I know that there's been one with Bluebird who has put out $1 million grant to be able to figure out how we can make urban cities a little bit more pleasant when it comes to street art. And as we continue to, as in America, continue to grow and we continue to be more accepting of individuals, you know, I know that I read an article in the Los Angeles Times that talked about urban art. And so maybe something that we need to look, I love our art that we have on our streets. I think we need more. I think that any business that's struggling with figuring out not only burglary or, you know, some of the hard things that we can see where we don't want plywood on walls, but if there's somebody struggling with a wall that they continue to paint, because here's what it is. It's like if you're a private owner of a business or of a facility or of a building, it's not the city's responsibility to take off that graffiti. It's your responsibility. And we can continue to push hard on them being able to remove it, or we continue to figure out, hey, can we get that piece of wall? And how do we, as a city, be able to bring philanthropy money or even businesses within Burien to be able to help with some of the issues that we have on those walls? And I gotta tell you, when it comes to graffiti, some of it is a nuisance, but some of it can also save a life if we can remove it in 24 hours. And as I've seen here lately, we have a major problem with that. And so, and it's at the same walls. And then there's, and when we talk about the environment, there's actually plants that we can plant that will, you know, help cover some of that wall so we don't continue to have graffiti on that wall. So I think it's something that maybe we can spend some time. I'd like to see if our art commissioners can look at some of these, you know, challenges that we have within our community. And I know that we allocate a lot of money for art. Well, not a lot, but just enough that whatever we can allocate. But I think it would be, how can we take care of those walls that continue to be a nuisance within our city? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sarah.
Thank you. I do have one follow-up question. And I don't know if this is a way of thinking about it or not, but I'll just put it out there. Do we go back and sort of correlate the positive vision that people have for the city with what kinds of things are people complaining about in the city? And I don't think that a vision of the future is like this thing I don't like, only we don't have it anymore. A vision is obviously much more expansive than that. But at the same time, the things that are bothering us now, if there are solutions in the vision, I think it's important to capture the relationship between those two things. And I'm wondering if that's part of how this is looked at.
I would say that we just had actually our first advisory group meeting for Burien 2044, which is the comprehensive plan portion of this effort. And we actually, the whole focus of the discussion was on vision. So along different elements. And I would say that people kind of move in that direction, is identifying what bothers them, what they like, and how they'd like to see the city in 20 years or longer. So I think it's a neat way of looking at it. So thanks for that idea and that thought.
Other comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. More to come.